time to smash it up on demand style. This isn't a live program this week because it is, everybody, a bye week, but a busy one here on Warchant TV. Busier one on warchant.com. So much news happening. I'm with Ira Schoffel, managing editor of warchant.com. The usual duo for the Monday Smash, but this is a video on demand, as always, presented by our friend Russ Voorhis from State Farm. We'll talk about Russ in just a little bit. Ira, I believe on the most previous Smash, we had your clock, the countdown clock. You were saying, I'm done. I don't want to talk about third down defense, or I don't want to talk about first down play calling. I want to talk about the offseason. This is the countdown clock. We kept it. I know a couple of viewers really wanted to see where it was. It's just December 1st, everybody. It's midnight. December 1st is the beginning of the offseason. But Ira, Florida State's kind of already started down that path. And we did get some answers. And going into the bye week, Florida State did make some massive changes. And now that we've had a few days to kind of let that wash over us, it's time to talk about the offensive coordinator. It's time to talk about the defensive coordinator, because Florida State is going to be paving their way into a Norvell 2.0 era in 2025. First of all, have you caught your breath this week after traveling from Chicago, South Bend back to Tallahassee and covering all this news? Or are you still, the whiplash is in full effect?
No, I think I'm ready to settle into this new era. I think of Florida State football, Mike Norvell's 2.0, I guess, version with this new staff. And like we've said, we expect there's probably going to be some more changes as well. But these were huge ones. I think we all expected some changes, but for Mike Norvell to fire both coordinators and a receivers coach, in one fell swoop was surprising. I think it surprised a lot of people around the program as well. But now here they are. And the question is, what is Mike Norvell going to do? We've already, hot boards out there looking at different candidates, and, that's important. But I think also just, the direction, the overall, the path he wants to take in terms of reassessing everything about his role in the team and everything else. There's going to be a lot of fun to, just kind of uncover over these next few months, like what his mindset is as he looks to version 2.0 of himself.
I think, for most people, the sexier hire is the offensive coordinator hire. And it's, what does Mike Norvell do on that side of the football when you average under 2 touchdowns a game for a season? And Florida State's got a couple games to go. Maybe that Charleston Southern game will rack up that number, Ira, closer to 17 a game by the end of the year. We'll see. That's aspirational, of course. But there's been a lot of discussion about, is Mike Norvell a good play caller? Is he not? Should Mike Norvell cede control of the offense and just let it be somebody else's start to finish so he can focus on the big picture, or should he not? We've talked, I think different members of the staff have talked about this over, the Jeff Cameron show, Wake Up, our show, it's headlines. I mean, y'all have had so many conversations, so have we. But I think we need to collect this all together and you like to say the stew, in one big pot of stew, and discuss what it is you think Mike Norvell should do, what it is I think Mike Norvell should do, because, again, he's had plenty of success as a play caller. We have our experts, Ira, on staff, and Coach Henshaw and Dominic Robinson saying, I still like the way he calls plays, but he also has to fix so many things for this organization. So, when you're looking for an offensive coordinator hire, or we get to a finalist list, from a hot board to a finalist list, are you saying that I think definitely Mike needs to give this part of it up so he can fix all the other things that are on fire? Or do you think that maybe, just maybe, Mike Norvell could be holding a Waffle House menu next year and be calling plays again?
Man, it's a tough call. I've kind of gone back and forth on it because this year was so bad, and because, not just bad offensively, bad as a football team. They're 1-9. They've been blown out 3 straight games. We'll see how these last 2 games play out, but the offense has been a disaster. So from that standpoint, from an optics standpoint, the smart play would seem to be let somebody else take over the offense, let them call the plays, and you focus on the big picture. And like you said, there's so many other things on this team that didn't go well this year, so it might be good for him to have his hands on all of those things. On the flip side of it, though, I was thinking about it a little bit, and just, I do think he's a good play caller. And I think, last year, the 2023 a lot of times people right now are going back and looking at the 2023 season and saying, well, that underperformed. They should have been better than they were with the talent they had. and that's fair. But I don't know that that was necessarily play calling. I think that was there were some other things at play there. I think the offensive line wasn't that good. I mean, I think we see now that that offensive line wasn't that good last year.
Right.
And so, the, you know, Jordan, it seemed like they weren't unleashing him as a runner, whether that was his choice or whether that was the coach's choice to keep him healthy, whatever it was. When you didn't have a great offensive line and you took him away as a running threat, you didn't really use him as a running threat. Well, now that offense didn't look quite as dynamic. I just go back to 2022, and I think, man, I thought he was exceptional as a play caller. I think you look at his history as a play caller; it's been at a high level. So it would be a little bit weird to say, okay, you've got this talent, and we're just going to throw it away because we feel like people need a fresh start, and they're not going to believe in you anymore as a play caller. So I don't know, man. It's going to be a fine line. Like I know the perception when people say, "Oh, is he going to let somebody have play calling, or is he going to be too stubborn to do that?" It's just like when people were saying 2 weeks ago, "Is he going to be too stubborn to fire coaches?" Well, we don't know how he's going to handle any of these things. He went out and fired 3 of them the other day, and we'll see. Maybe he's willing to give up the whole offense. He said he's willing to consider it, but I don't know that it's open and shut what the best thing for this team is. It may depend on, it probably does depend on like what coordinator he ultimately wants to get.
Yeah, if he's, for example, Brennan Marion is on everybody's list just because of obvious ties, and he's shouted out Mike Norvell this season in multiple media opportunities. There's a connection there. If he's hired, for example, as the offensive coordinator, I don't think it's an open and shut issue. I think at that point, because of the connection they have, that I would still consider that to be an open question. Like, even if he was introduced and Mike Norvell said, "I'm looking forward to him calling plays," I'd say, for how long? The first time that perhaps there's a struggle, do you take over? I mean, Coach Bowden in his heyday, there's a lot of moments where play calling went back and forth and back and forth. A famous story of Mark Richt saying, "Hey man, you going to give me the keys or what?" And I'm sure that there are other stories Coach Henshaw can talk about going back in time as well, where when you are that gifted at something, and I agree with you, I think it's objectively true that Mike Norvell has had his moments in a young career, but an accomplished career where he's called plays at the highest level. Like, he's gotten into a rhythm, and it's been something to see. When you have that and you're watching somebody struggle, are you going to let them continue to take the test, or are you going to take the pencil out of their hand and start filling in the bubbles with the correct answers? It's going to be a tough deal if it's somebody like that. But Ira, if it's an established name who has an offense with different philosophies, then I don't know that you would want Mike Norvell meddling, because there aren't that many similarities between his offense and maybe the next guy. So the hire itself is probably going to tell us a bit of a story there.
Yeah, and sometimes so that could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're only looking at guys that you feel like are going to be married to what you already do, or are people that you've already worked with, then that kind of, that's going to lead you down that road. Or if you're going to be completely wide open and consider other coordinators that run different systems with different terminology and all that comes with it, then maybe they get more autonomy. But whether or not you're considering those is probably going to determine that. So, I'd love to be inside Mike Norvell's mind to know exactly what he's looking for, as they begin this process, because they're getting other coordinators are reaching out to them. He's reaching out to people as well. And, again, we don't know exactly how it's all going to play out, but, I do think, you can make an argument that if you've got to you're going to have to hire a new defensive coordinator as well. You're going to have to probably hire several other assistant coaches and maybe some support staff. Does it make more sense to go with a big high profile splash as a DC and maybe not as high profile splash on the offensive side because that is Mike Norvell's specialty? Or do you try to go and get, not huge names, but really established play callers, established coordinators on both sides of the ball? So I think there's a lot of different ways they can go about it. I would like to see Mike Norvell take more of a CEO role, but it also, again, you're kind of giving up maybe one of his greatest strengths.
Yeah, we joked about this on the Cameron show this week. Like, perhaps it's time for Mike that if he hears laughter from the offensive game planning, the film room, the meeting, the install, all that stuff in that room, don't go in that room, Mike. Just order them pizzas. It's their time. It's your time you got to sulk a little bit, walk down the hallway, get them some food, but then go handle the recruiting side of the operation. Go micromanage something else. Because this is what happens. You're paid $10 million not to be the offensive coordinator, but you're paid $10 million to be the head of the operation. Now, that sounds nice, and it's kind of funny, but, I mean, he's got to choose. This is bigger than the offensive coordinator decision. In a way, his offensive coordinator choice is going to tell us what he thinks about the entirety of the operation and how much he needs to be involved on a day-to-day basis in different facets of the operation. It could be from a recruiting perspective. It could be talent evaluation perspective. It could be that he's trying to organize practice differently, and so therefore he's going to spend more time with the defense during practice than he has in the past. Right. There were Jimbo early on. I remember hearing this from a pretty good source. I know you know this as well. Mark Stoops wasn't that thrilled with how often Jimbo Fisher was on his side of the ball and taking over in some instructional parts that he thought, dude, be on your half of the field. This is my responsibility. But Mike's got to choose what he wants to be, I think, at this point, from a very, very basic perspective. Like, is he going to be Mr. Micromanager from all fields, or is he going to, as you said, make a turnkey defensive coordinator hire, let that guy exist on his own half of the field, and then I'm really going to deep dive and make sure that my offensive coaches are doing things that my previous staff did not? It's a big question he's got to answer before he even makes the hire.
Yeah, and there's so many variables, because I'm sure, if you look back at the season and you people ask me all the time, how could this have happened? Like, how could you go from a team that, none of us thought they were going to be a national championship team this year, but we did think they were a team that could go anywhere from maybe 8-4 to 10-2, kind of in that range. I think that's where most people expected. How do you go from that to 1-9 and getting blown out in some of these games? And to me, it all started with that offensive line. As I mentioned earlier, I think, the coaching staff, the media, led the charge of believing this offensive line was better than it was a year ago because of Jordan Travis. I mean, I think at the end of the day, Jordan Travis and Trey Benson and, having two giants at wide receiver just masked all the problems they had on the offensive line. We thought, okay, you're bringing in two new guards. That's going to fix everything or take it to a higher level. And then that didn't happen. And then one of the best ones, Richie Leonard, gets hurt and is out for the year. So it's kind of been just a comedy of errors. But at the root of all of this, to me, was the offensive line. It was not what we thought it was going to be. They could not run the football. Mike Norvell would not have brought DJ Uyunglele in to run this offense if he thought they would not be able to run the football. There's no way he would have done that. Once they got in a situation where they're constantly in second and third and longs, and you've got to drop DJ back and throw him 35 times a game, this season was done. And then it's just a matter of now everything that kind of spiraled off of that. So to me, I think from Mike Norvell's, the greatest thing he needs to do is the personnel, is figuring out what can he do to get this offensive line, to get a quarterback, to get, I feel like pretty strongly they need to get one or two proven playmakers out wide. I feel like you probably make do with the running backs they have. Maybe you go get another one. But I just think when you look at offensive personnel, to me, that would be almost more important to me than who's calling the plays and who, who's got the keys to the offense. Because if you don't have a quarterback and an offensive line, you're pretty much sunk. And that's what we saw, I think, this whole season.
Well, and yeah, you could argue that as practices run next year, it's going to look different, because obviously you have different personnel teaching kids. You're going to have a lot of new bodies on the field as well. I mean, I have to think that the roster turnover year over year is going to be massive. That maybe Mike Norvell's biggest role next year would be that of psychologist, to make sure all those new kids are engaged, and he also the new processes that they're trying to, ingrain, new habits, new work habits are taking shape. It might not even be about, hey, make sure that you have 7 yards of depth on that route before you break off. It could be that, all right, is this kid comfortable where we are right now? He has to check on such a fundamental level when you're talking about the roster itself. You got to bring in more talent. You got to get better players in here. Yes, 100%. But then also 1-9, 2-10, whatever it's going to be, is going to take a toll on the guys that are held over. And then there's going to be so many new players in here that are trying to break old habits and build new ones. Ira, it's almost like he has to be the team sports psychologist because he's trying to build something from the ground up. It's either damaged goods with the guys that are sticking around in this program or people who have never learned the way that they're about to do things. In terms of the process itself, the basics of A to B to C, you can see where he has to be extremely involved in those minutia and then let the other guys worry about the X's and O's if he wants to go that path. Or because this program is going to look so much different in spring camp of 2025 in numerous ways than it has looked the last few years.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge tapestry. Instead of a stew, we'll go with a tapestry of suck right now. There's just so many little pieces things that went poorly. And one of them was, you did lose a lot of good leaders. You were hoping some of the veterans on this team would establish themselves as leaders. That hasn't happened. A lot of them have not played well. And then you brought in a group of transfers that you just assumed would kind of, just embrace the culture and fit right in. And it doesn't feel like that has really happened either. The one thing I would say, though, is, man, it's amazing how quickly that can get better once you have better players and people start believing in each other. Because, again, you look at a perfect example is Indiana. Nobody lost more. I mean, that was a broken team. They went 3-9 last year. Their head coach got fired. They've been mired in mediocrity. Our guy Kirk Signetti comes in, brings in 13 new guys from his former school that understand how he wants to do things, brings in his whole coaching staff. Now they're 10-0. I mean, like they can't, it's like they feel like they can't lose. Yep. And so the nice thing about this offseason, to me, this is why I really felt it was important. I've never been a big advocating of firing coaches. It's just, I don't know. A lot of times we don't know what's all really happening, and you just hate to, just change somebody's life or call for somebody to be fired. That's not something I like to do. But I knew that I felt like if you make some changes to the staff, it gives you a chance to reset. And it helps reset with the players. It helps reset with the coaches. Gives everybody a fresh start. So now if you bring in, 40, 50 new players between the high school ranks and the transfer portal, and you've got this new coaching staff, and now Mike Norvell doesn't have the pressure of this ridiculous season kind of weighing on him. Because I think that when you talk about sports psychology, this team has gotten worse because, they came into the season with all those expectations and didn't play well, and that just kind of spiraled on them. So I really think, a fresh start is going to be great. Now, if you go out and play terribly against Alabama, it's going to be hard to kind of regroup from that. But I do think you can get the energy going in the right direction just by hitting reset and bringing in a whole lot of new faces.
Well, you'll be able to absorb setbacks next year because your goals aren't as lofty, I think. True. As well. That's part of the psychology of it. Is like, we're going to take our lumps, guys, along the way versus, hey, this is a championship mindset. We're going to be, they're back on that path. Nobody wants to be there, but I mean, let's be real. I think the messaging is going to be a little bit different, and that can bring its own breath of fresh air. Speaking of breaths of fresh air, we all know the exhale when you feel like you're covered. Like, okay, at least I'm covered for this, that, and the other. Insurance, that's what they do. That's what State Farm agent Russ Voorhis does for the entire state of Florida, the entire state of Georgia, and Alabama. He's got you covered. State Farm, a powerful name. Russ Voorhis, a dedicated Nole. Nice combination of those two concepts. Again, for those of you listening on the podcast and not watching visually, the phone number is on the screen if you're watching on Warchant TV for his 2 brick-and-mortar operations. But RussVoorhis.com, it's his name.com, RussVorhis.com, to support Russ Voorhis, and Nole, who supports all athletic programs and us here at Warchant TV. Ira, he knows of which he speaks, and he also is as passionate as everybody who's watching this and listening to this right now.
Yeah, and if you're in the Jacksonville area, the greater Jacksonville area, he's got brick and mortar offices over there, so you can go in and see his staff and meet with them, or you can call them, and they'll be happy to help you. And if you do give them a call or go on the website, mention you heard about him on the Smash and Warchant.com, and that you're a Nole, and he'll provide services to everybody. You don't have to be a Nole, but if you are, he might talk a little football with you. His staff might talk a little football with you as well. And we support Russ. He has supported Warchant.com and Gene for going back to the very beginning, and we're glad to have him as a partner with the Smash.
If you do want to make that phone call, for those of you listening, 904-834-4282, 904-834-4282. Ira, discussing about, again, these types of moments where you exhale and you say, okay, this is going to flip from questionable to steady. One of the biggest examples I can think of in recent Florida State history was when Tatum Bethune got on campus and he started operating in practice at linebacker. It looked night and day, the operation did, because you had somebody who knew how to coordinate on the field. You had somebody who knew how to communicate on the field. And I remember distinctly so many of Adam Fuller's camps and practices where he would be right behind the linebackers and barking instructions and telling them where their eyes needed to be and where they needed to look. And then Tatum's out there, and then magically he's 10 steps farther back in the cut and watching it all happen. That's what can happen for a football program when you bring better players in there that know what they're doing. And I wonder, we can talk about this for offense or defense. Will a standard prerequisite of the hire be that they have 3 or 4 guys that they bring with them? This is that day and age of college football. People laughed at the ending of Any Given Sunday, Ira, when Al Pacino takes the other job and he names his quarterback and it's Willie Beeman. I'm taking him with me. That is college football every year now until the rules change. Do you think that's going to be a part of the mandatory equation when Mike Norvell makes a hire, or would it just be a nice luxury to help flip this thing quickly? Because to have players who know the way a coordinator works, it would be a very seamless way to transition from where we are now to where Florida State wants to go.
Yeah, I think to me it would be a nice luxury, just because I don't know that you can't really put any of that into a contract. You can't hire this coordinator under the premise that he's going to bring these players with him. So it's a challenging situation. But I do think they're in this day and age, like you said, a free movement. Players a lot of times identify with coaches and coordinators, especially if they have success. So if I'm a linebacker or a quarterback or a wide receiver, whatever, and my coordinator is putting me in positions to succeed and we're having success, and maybe we're doing it at maybe a G5 school or a Power 5 school that's not on Florida State's level, and that coordinator or that coach gets a job at Florida State, and I could go with him and get on that profile program, wear the spear on the helmet, be part of Doak Campbell Stadium and all the tradition of Florida State athletics. That might be real appealing. So it may not be a matter of this coach has to promise I'm going to bring these players. Those players may want to come because, here's this opportunity. You see it every time, from when Mario Cristobal went to Miami, some guys went down there from Oregon. When Rhett Lashley left Miami and went to SMU, there's guys from Miami that went with him over there. Obviously that James Madison team, the offensive coordinator at Vanderbilt brought his quarterback and tight end over from New Mexico State. I mean, there are countless examples of this around the country. So I do think that's going to be part of it. But I don't know that, you can just plan on it. But I would say this, I'm really looking forward to most of the focus, as you said at the beginning of this, is going to be on the offensive coordinator. That's the sexier position. I'm really interested to see what a new defensive coordinator can do with this defense, because I just feel like this team has not played with passion on that side of the ball all year. And so I think there are guys, you and I, we've been to practices. We love those young defensive backs. I think there's some talent with the young linebackers. Even on the defensive line, you're probably going to be losing some veterans, but I think there's some nice young pieces there as well. They're going to have to do more in the portal there. But I just, I always think back to Mark Stoops' first year. You mentioned him earlier. How good that defense got in 1 year. It went from being very poor before Mark Stoops came in, and he got them good. He got them solid to good pretty much overnight. And a lot of it, I felt like, was just confidence. He taught them things in a way that they were confident in what they were doing. They started to have some success. They played hard. They played physical, and it changed overnight. And for whatever reason, I don't know why things went poorly towards the end with Adam Fuller. And they didn't get as much attention as the offense because the offense was even worse. But this defense, I feel like, could play at a much higher level pretty quickly. And so I'm really excited to see what happens on that side of the ball. And I think the right defensive coordinator can unlock some things.
Well, if they just ran to the ball, it would improve things. Yeah. Some guys do. Don't get me wrong. I don't ever want to say the entirety of the 11 is not doing that. But there's enough guys out there that you're saying, man, there's no spirit. There's no fire. And that's something that's coming up on warchant.com. We're recording this on Friday the 15th in case you're watching later. but the defensive coordinator hot board is appearing on warchant.com. We already have the offensive coordinator hot board. And to remind everybody, if you want to sign up for warchant.com, we have what we're calling the 150 special. The 150 special, which means you get you get 7 days of access, I should say, for just $1, but it gets better from there. What's the 50 part, you say? 50% off your annual subscription to warchant.com after those first 7 days. So $1 for a week of access to warchant.com. Get caught up on all the boards, hot boards for the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, a lot of recruiting developments right now, the old switcheroo with a couple of quarterbacks happening for the 2025 class. Transfer portal stuff is coming in the near future, but $1 for 7 days of access, then 50% off, half off an annual subscription to warchant.com. A lot of coverage coming up there, and we look forward to seeing you over on the boards at warchant.com. Yeah, Ira, the defensive coordinator position, again, because offense gets the glitz, the glam, and frankly, because it's been so awful for Florida State this year, that would be the place that you look at and say, distinct improvements can occur on offense first, because how could they not? How could you get any worse? But the defensive job is a very important one to nail as well. And the questions for the offense make their way over to the questions for the defense. Do you bring in a guy who's got 3 or 4 assistants that he wants to bring with him to make sure that his process is instilled immediately, so there's no learning curve for his underlings? Do you allow for that defensive coordinator to be somebody who's been in the business 10 to 20 years and you leave him alone? Is it somebody that you get highly involved with? How much do you want that position to be somebody who recruits well, who has ties to the Southeast? A lot of considerations for Mike Norvell on the defensive coordinator front. And they can, again, Ira, this is a group that can get a whole lot better in a short period of time if they look just a little bit more buttoned up and fiery on defense. I would imagine they'd want somebody who plays a little bit more aggressive too, who has a more aggressive style.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of times what you do in these situations, just like in relationships, we do it a lot of times with coaches, is when one style is not working, then you want to go the other way because you don't like you didn't like that, so let's go in this direction. And so I could see that maybe a defensive coordinator that believes more in zone concepts, because Adam Fuller was predominantly a man defense. They did matchups and things like that, but it was it was much more of a man defense, which is fine, but it also is not confusing anybody. I didn't feel like anybody they played this season was confused by what Florida State was doing defensively. They knew what they wanted. Going back to the Georgia Tech game, I felt like the Georgia Tech game was a really bad sign to me, because, and a lot of people were more upset about the offense. I was more upset about the defense, because I felt like Georgia Tech's offense in that game, if they had drawn up their plays on a whiteboard, they wouldn't have been executed any better than they were on the field against Florida State. Like, Florida State just bit on every trap. They ran into every block. It was exactly, they knew exactly where Florida State's defenders were going to be. And I think we saw that at different times throughout the year. And again, that's not all coaching. Guys have to beat their blocks. Guys have to make plays. They have to win their one-on-ones. But you had a defense that I thought lost confidence. And so, to me, the biggest thing I'd want to see is a defensive coordinator who gets these players to really believe in him, maybe whether it's because of his track record or his personality, and then also he convinces them that he's putting them in positions to succeed and make plays. I think that's a big deal. How many guys he brings with him, it seems like that's not quite as it doesn't have to be as many assistants coming with him as on offense. Offense feels like, these OCs a lot of times they're definitely going to want their offensive line coach. A lot of times they're going to want their quarterbacks coach too. I could see bringing in a DC without having to bring multiple assistant coaches, but there's no reason not to if he's got a combination that really works. And then the last thing I touched on about recruiting, and that's something we've talked a lot about this week, as you mentioned, with those hot boards as well. And a lot of fans want better recruiting out of the coordinator positions. To me, that's not high on my list in terms of a coordinator. I think you've got to have great recruiters on the staff, and they've got to do a better job of that than Mike Norvell did with 1.0 version of his staff. But coordinators, to me, I don't know. It's a luxury if they are great recruiters, but to me, that's not more. I would not sacrifice anything else for, hey, but he's a great recruiter. For a coordinator, man, I want somebody who's going to really put this team in position to succeed.
Yeah, this is, if you think back to some of the best recruiting Florida State ever did, it was Jimbo's 1.0 existence, that first staff.
Yeah.
And Mark Stoops had a lot of pull in, say, the Miami area, but that was James Coley, that was Eddie Gran, that was DJ Elliott, among others, who were kicking ass in that regard. The coordinators were involved, but it wasn't like those were your stone cold killers. So it can work that way. But yeah, I think to your point, if you're going to take more established names who are on, let's get organized and let's know what we're doing, and top to bottom, let's be a buttoned up operation. All right. Well, then those assistant hires become all the more important for the people who want to see improvement in terms of the recruiting area. And do these guys have experience in this region of the country? Do they know people in the state of Florida? Do they know people in South Georgia? Is there a way that you can see the map divided up? It's not the same game, Ira, as it was 10, 15 years ago in terms of recruiting. That still matters, because at the end of the day, I believe that those relationships can save you money if you have somebody who understands how to connect to high school coaches and kids, because the trust factor is going to be there. And where there's trust, maybe you don't have to outbid everybody in the NIL game, because that's going to get dicey over the next, period of college football as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing Mike Norvell did, I think a tact he tried that I think is now looking back proved unsuccessful is, he didn't bring in a staff with a ton of connections, obviously recruiting in the state. And then they got hurt those first couple of years because of COVID. They couldn't go on the road and build those relationships. So it was like kind of a double whammy. And I'm sure if he knew that was going to be the case, maybe he would have built his staff a little bit differently. But then to kind of supplement it, he brought in a lot of support staff members. They've got Kewan Ratliff's on the staff, big name in the state of Florida, has a lot of connections, coach 7-on-7. They have other guys on the staff that help in the recruiting operation that open those doors. And the idea is that those guys can get these coaches on the phone, get these, help build these relationships. And then the position coaches can kind of come in and kind of finish the deal. Like those assistants in recruiting have to kind of pave the door, and then those coaches come in. But I do think it's a little bit different if the coaches have those authentic relationships, and if they don't need somebody else to kind of open the door for them. So I do think this staff, as he rebuilds this staff, the position coaches, I do think, need to be, much better recruiters. But going back to that topic though, there are some DCs out there that are known as great recruiters. Again, I if they can do that and be great coaches, great. But I would lean on great coaches at the coordinator level.
This is what we'll get to see over the next few weeks, which is the priorities. Where does Mike Norvell rank the highest importance for the hires he makes? It should be very interesting. A closing thought about the final two games of the football season in 15 seconds.
Contact Russ Voris for an auto quote today.
Ira, I don't think I'm speaking out of school here. I apologize if I am. But it seemed like, just from talking to you, that practices before these firings, they got a little bit tough. It was weighing on everybody. Everybody who was out there on the practice fields, they could feel the weight of 1-8 at the time before 1-9 led to some changes. Are you interested more in what you're going to see out of Florida State on the practice fields as the season rounds out? Because sometimes this can just be a weight lifted off of shoulders. Doesn't mean that Florida State magically is going to find an offense that averages 25 points a game, let alone 30 or the numbers from last year. But, I mean, Mike Norvell is going to start to set the tone for what comes next with a couple of big absences on a day-to-day basis in practice. Are you interested to see what that's going to look like?
Yeah, I am. And I, just anecdotally talking to people around the program, I did hear that at the practices they had this past week that, Mike Norvell was very rejuvenated. Like, I think he, he's known for probably weeks that he had to make some changes, and probably at a really high level. And I think a lot of people on the staff have known changes were going to come, but nobody knew exactly what. Well, now that's happened. I do feel like it kind of, just a little bit of a kickstart, I think, for these last couple of games. And sometimes when things like that happen, it brings the guys who are still here closer together. The concerns I would have probably a little bit on offense are more than defense, from the standpoint of, those offensive linemen have all been tied with Alex Atkins the whole time they've been here. From Darius Washington, Maurice Smith, Rob Scott, even the guys that have been here 2 or 3 or 4 years, Alex Atkins has been their guy. And so now, Gabe Fertitta is taking over there, the analyst who coached him in those first 3 games. And he's, tight with them, but it's just not the same. So I wonder how those guys handle it. I don't think it's going to be quite as big of an impact on the skill position players or the quarterbacks. Those guys are more aligned with their position coaches. And I don't, Ron Dugan's, the receivers were not playing well anyway. And they have some people on the staff that can help with the receivers. So I really don't think, to me, offensive line is the one area I'm a little bit concerned about, just how those guys respond to this. And then, because at the end of the day, they're 22, 23-year-old people, and they just saw one of the people they love get fired. On the defensive side, I'm actually pretty optimistic. As I mentioned earlier, I just think that when you're not playing well, things can get kind of stale. And I think Randy Shannon, he's not the most popular assistant coach on the staff with a lot of fans, but I do think he relates well to players, and he has been a coordinator before. And I'm curious if he'll kind of maybe try to, maybe dial up some things that, they haven't used, but maybe things he's used in the past. And if you do that, it can infuse the players with some excitement because, hey, what we did in this situation in the past on 3rd and long or whatever, those things didn't work. Let's try this. And the players may play with more passion because it's just something different. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about what the defense looks like in these last couple of games. A little curious and cautious about the offense.
We'll be documenting it here on Warchant TV, warchant.com. Ira, this week on the website, so much work coming out of your end of the operation, like columns and features and hot boards. And the latest here, when it comes to recruiting, we've had several videos about Tramell Jones decommitting from Florida State, and now Carter Smith, Florida State heavily involved with a quarterback who, if you just look at the recruiting rankings, is a higher rated player than the one that just went out the door and flipped over to Florida. For a bye week, he
hasn't officially flipped to Florida, I don't think.
Has he not? Was it just decommitment?
He decommitted, and I think people are expecting him to go to Florida. I mean, that's probably where it's going to go, but he hasn't. I don't believe he's flipped yet.
Forgive me for that part of it, but he did decommit on Thursday morning. But it's just for a bye week, this has been a very transformative week for the program in a lot of ways. And is there anything that you want to promote that might be coming in the next few days on warchant.com?
Yeah, well, also, the other sports are getting going too. Men's basketball Friday night, depending on when people see this, men's basketball plays Friday night against the Gators, number 20 in the country. That's going to be a first big early test for Florida State. They did go on the road last week and win at Rice, which was nice. But this is a much bigger step up in competition. Soccer in the postseason, hosting NCAA tournament rounds. There's just a lot going on across the campus. And then next week we'll be back out at practice. We didn't get to cover any practices this week during the bye week, but we'll be back out there next week. And like you said, that's going to be, even though they're playing Charleston Southern, a game that you'd like to think is going to be a pretty routine victory. It's just going to be interesting to watch kind of how the guys are handling things as they move forward into this kind of transition period.
As we close the show, 15 days, 14 hours, 7 minutes, and counting until Ira's New Year countdown. It's not January 1st; it's December 1st.
We should have the noisemakers and pop some champagne at the end of the season.
We all deserve it. You out there do. I'm not just talking about us on staff. I'm saying Nole fans, when the season's over, have yourself a celebration because this has been a ride. And we thank you all for joining us here on warchant.com, Warchant TV for that ride. Remember, if you're thinking about joining up, there's a lot of change coming. I can't stress it enough. The $150 special, $1 for 7 days of access, and then half off an annual subscription to warchant.com. Give us a chance to earn your business. You will not be disappointed. Our thanks again to Director Ben Spicer for helping out with the video after we were done. To our sponsor, of course, Russ Voorhis. He's always awesome. We'll be back for a live smash next week here in just a few days on Warchant TV. For Ira, I'm Tom. We'll talk to you next time. And stay tuned to warchant.com. A lot of things happening. Be on the lookout for that defensive coordinator board as well.